This is Dennis Raimondi at the Coffee League. My guest today, Penney Garrett. She is Director of Quality Control and Wholesale Accounts at Copper Door Coffee Roasters in Denver, Colorado. Its Denver's only 100% female-owned coffee roaster. So, Penny, thank you so very much for taking the time to come and talk with me today.
Absolutely. Thanks for having
Great.
me.
And I should let our listeners know I was recently at the Seattle Coffee Expo, and Penny had a booth there for her company, along with a few other people, and we got to talking. And I want to cover coffee from every angle, and for people that are coffee nerds, the people that are just wanting to find out more about specialty coffee, people that want to get into the coffee industry, and what the different jobs and whatnot are available. So we talk to everyone we possibly can that has a career in coffee or a deep interest in it. And also, I also want to get into later on in the interview today, Penny, the culture of coffee in Denver and also women in coffee. We've done a couple of shows on
Sure.
that and we want to discuss that more. Penny, how did you first come to the coffee industry?
Well, like a lot of people, I started out as a barista in not working for Starbucks, but in a kind of similar environment. It was a corporate coffee shop where we had to wear polo shirts. We had a uniform, and we made a lot of blended drinks.
Uh-huh.
And and coffee remained something. I stayed a barista for a long time. I would explore other avenues. I went to college. I went to school for clinical herbalism and nutrition. And for a long time, coffee was just the thing that I had on the side that paid the bills. I worked as a shop manager and I did some baking and for one of the shops I worked for, but primarily working as a barista. And for a long time, I sort of, the craft coffee scene in Denver is pretty fantastic, but I didn't really know all of what was available to me. It felt, and this is the way I feel like it's been in coffee for a long time, but thankfully this is changing now. It really felt like every different aspect of coffee was a very separate track, and there wasn't a lot of crossover. So it's like, okay, fine, you have 10 years of barista experience. It doesn't mean you can just start roasting. And that's still true, but I think that there's a lot more transparency and communication between the different jobs so that it feels more accessible now. But I kind of reached a ceiling where I felt like I was in a bit of a dead end job and didn't know what I wanted to do. And I stepped out of coffee for about a year, and I found that I really missed it, but I knew that I didn't want to go back to being a barista, and I wasn't really interested, nor did I have the resources to start my own shop. So I reached out to some friends that I had in the industry that run a roastery, and I kind of just started reaching out to friends that were working more on the back end of coffee and exploring what options I might have to stay in coffee without just working front of house in the cafe. And I reached out to Herb Brodsky at Novo Coffee, old friend of mine, and been in the business a long time and wanted some advice. And he put me in contact with his son, Joseph, who runs 90 Plus Coffee. And he's got a farm in Panama. And I kind of just worked, I was blessed with the opportunity to work for 90 Plus for about 9 months.
What did you do for 90 Plus? What was your job there?
I kind of just did odd jobs and whatever needed doing. I mean, it was everything from kind of personal assistant work to, I got to start to step into what a quality control position might look like. So during harvest season, I helped catalog all of the samples that we had coming in from the farm, many, many different lots, and sample roasted them, and got to taste all of that stuff with my coworkers. And I was just so happy to be handling green coffee on the back end of things and learning that side of things. I knew that I had really found where I wanted to stay within the industry.
Well, let me ask you this. Let me ask you this, Penny, before we go ahead. You said when you were in coffee, you were working as a barista, you hit a ceiling, and then you left coffee, but then you missed it. Now you go back into the coffee industry, but in a totally different role. What were you missing, and whatever you missed when you first went away from it, were you finding that even though it was a different job the second time you came in?
Like you're saying, like what aspect of it was I missing?
Yeah, you mentioned when you left being a barista, you missed it, and now you go back to coffee, but not as a barista. So what were you missing, and did you find it in your second job?
Yes, I think there's this inherent community mindedness in coffee, whether you are, obviously, if you're a barista and you're interacting with the neighborhood around you, that's really community minded, but it's still there on the back end. The people there's so many hands that touch coffee before it gets served in a cafe, from the farmers and importers to roasters and people that do sales. It is really a great community, and I also just honestly, I just miss geeking out about it. I love tasting coffee and learning about it and tasting and learning from other people. And so, and I don't know if I even could have answered that necessarily at the time. There was just something that was drawing me back, and I wanted to explore further into what I could do.
It seems that coffee is a culture in and of itself, onto itself.
Yeah.
And it's different in different places, but whether you plug into that culture as on the front end as a barista, on the back end as a roaster, or somebody that's sourcing, or even dealing with the farms, that you're still in that culture of coffee. Is that right? Does that sound right?
Yeah.
Okay. And
yes.
Tell us about.
I
go
love
ahead.
how worldly it is. It's so worldly too. I mean, you saw this at the expo in Seattle. I mean, you have people from all over the world, every color. I love how much it incorporates every nook and cranny of the world. And there's been a lot of separation between what the farmers are doing and what the baristas are doing. And there's still a lot of pay disparity. There's still a lot of work to be done.
Right.
But I think I love being at events and educating people and working to bridge that gap.
Right. I mean, one of the things I've found out in coffee, and I approach coffee not as somebody in the industry, but as a journalist writing about it. And before that, I with my radio and all, I've interviewed all the major political figures over the last 10 years and all. And politics, for whatever reason, tends to take people apart. But I notice in coffee, it brings people together. I can't specifically articulate why that happens. And I've experienced coffee now in different countries and different continents. And there's something about the culture that's very attractive and inclusive, or not always, but moves in that direction or lends itself to that. Now tell us specifically about your job in terms of if somebody works for a big roaster and they work as director of quality control, what do you do? How do you control that quality? What do you do on a day-to-day basis?
Well, I wouldn't call us a big roaster, at least not at this point. We're pretty small.
Okay.
My job is kind of still transforming and developing, but a lot of what I do is I do quality control cuppings with our roaster once a week and help check in with flavor profiles. We want to cup the coffee and make sure that everything is staying consistent from roast to roast, week to week, month to month as the coffee ages. I often help the roaster when we are picking a new coffee that we want to bring in, helping her dial in what our roast profile is going to be, coming up with tasting notes for how we're going to talk about that coffee to the public. And then more things that are just day-to-day quality within the shop, making sure that everything that goes in and out on the wholesale side of things looks and tastes and functions the best that it can and as smoothly as it can.
Mm-hmm.
And then I also work with all of the inquiries that we get from people that potentially want to buy our coffee. I meet with them and taste with them and talk with them about what their needs are and how we can maybe be a good fit for their shop or their office or their restaurant or whatever it may be. I also teach public cuppings. So, and this is actually my favorite part of the job is I love tasting coffee with people and teaching them about all of the flavors that can appear. I've done, I don't even know how many cuppings with people at this point, both just individuals that want to learn and other professionals in the industry and people that are interested in buying our coffee. And I see just every time people might come in the door and they're a little, I don't know, maybe they seem a little grouchy or they're not very smiley or whatever it may be. And in the process of teaching them about how coffee is cupped and teaching them to taste and really taking a tour around the world by showing them all of the different beautiful origins we have, I watch people just have so much fun. They just light up.
Let me ask you about that. When as a professional, when you're cupping, what are you looking for? Especially in your role as director of quality control, when you cup, what do you taste that indicates to you this is of good quality, or this is of bad quality or mediocre quality?
Well, it depends on if we're looking to purchase or if we're just checking in with our own roasts. If we're looking to purchase, we could be looking for any number of things, a flavor profile that we don't have that we want, or just something different and special. And we're making sure that literally that the coffee is of good quality, that it tastes good, and that we can do something lovely with it. And when we're doing an internal cupping, like I said, we're making sure that everything tastes okay, as far as what our roaster Nicole has done with it, as far as if the coffee, we want to make sure that you're not tasting age. We want to make sure that there aren't defects, both when we're purchasing and as we're going through the coffees that we've bought.
And when you have these classes and people come in and you're training them to taste, do you notice that some people, well, two things, some people have much better palates than others and can distinguish the nuances, the subtleties of the different tastes better than others? And number two, do their coffee tastes then generally change significantly after they've had that experience?
Yes. I just hosted a group of seniors they were a church group the other day, and they were so delightful. And the man who put together the group that came to do the tour and tasting sent me a thank you email, and he said, this has definitely influenced the way I taste coffee and the way I brew and what I'll buy. So definitely, and that's really nice to hear. And as far as the first part of your question, yes and no. It's interesting how I'm so familiar with our coffees at this point that I can walk up to them and it's almost like part of my brain shuts off, which I, of course, try not to do, but I know what they taste like and I know what to expect and I know what I'm looking for. It's really fun to taste with people, whether they have experience or not, and that have never tasted our coffees before, and see what they find in the cup. And I tasted with two women this morning. One of them has her sommelier training, so she knows about tasting from wine and she's got a good palate. And the other woman hadn't done anything in that vein, and they both did really well on the cupping table, and they found, I mean, the fruity coffees, they found the fruit. They picked up on floral notes. They picked up on things that professionals would also pick up on. But it is also fun to see, even if somebody doesn't necessarily come up with the same words as we would use in the industry. I remember cupping with a couple, and when she tasted one of our natural Ethiopians, it's a natural coffee, it's fermented with the fruits, it's you can taste fruit and flowers and citrus and ferment in this coffee. And one of the things that she said about the coffee was blue cheese. And I just love that, because that's totally different. You're never going to see that as a tasting note on a bag of coffee, but what she was picking up on the fermentation process.
Fermentation. Wow. So
yeah, and I just thought that was so great that she picked up on it, and it processed in her mouth in that way.
I have to think
So
certain people are just have great natural abilities in that area. Okay, so
Yeah.
you worked as a barista for a number of years, and then you went into
Yeah.
sort of the back end of the industry. And so, for you, does knowing what a barista's life and work like help you in what you do? And do you think it's important that baristas also have interaction with and have a deeper understanding of the roasting and quality control and green buying and all that happens
Yes.
on the other end? To elaborate on
Yes.
that.
Well, I think, I think you've probably heard people say that people that have worked in service industry they might tip better. They might just have a better understanding of what their service is going to be like on a busy night in a restaurant. I just think having worked a position like that is beneficial. Having worked in a fast-paced environment with the public is, I don't know, it's character building. And yes, definitely. So part of the reason that I felt like I had hit a ceiling, part of the reason was just the way that shop was structured, but also it wasn't a roastery. So it can be a little bit harder if you're working in a shop where you don't see the roasting every day. Right. You don't see the production side of things. Now, what's great about our shop is we have one shop that's just a cafe, and it's in the Lowry neighborhood. It's next to Lowry Beer Garden. And then we've got our roastery and cafe at First and Santa Fe in the Santa Fe Arts District. And that shop is really special because it's a very open floor plan. And so the roaster's right there, the physical person, the roaster, and the mechanical roaster. Our production area, we've got 2 cupping tables that obviously people can sit at and work at their laptop or have meetings when we're not cupping, and cafe space. And so there's a lot of transparency. It's easy for the barista to see what the roaster is doing and go over there and ask questions. And a lot of our baristas help out on the production side of things. And I think that's really great for them because they're able to see what goes into a lot of this, and it's very transparent. If they get burnt out on front of house and they want to do something else, it's right there and it's accessible. So it can be a little harder in a shop. I think a lot of shops in Denver are really helping to foster better relationships with their roasters, so that baristas will go do cuppings at multiple roasteries, and sometimes baristas will get to do origin trips and go to the farms. And the more that we can have crossover between these different parts of coffee, not only is that good for the individual in regards to if they want to change their career path, but it helps them be better at their jobs, to talk about the coffee in a more genuine, authentic, and accurate manner with customers that walk in the door.
Right. Have you ever actually gone and visited any of the farms?
I did. I got to go to 90 Plus's farm in Panama.
And what was that like?
Well, their farm is pretty special. It's beautiful. It's up in a cloud forest on a mountaintop, and yeah, it was fantastic. And it was kind of it was. I've done quite a bit of traveling in my life. It was kind of shocking that it was the first time I'd been to a coffee farm, because this has played such a big part in my life. It was like meeting an old friend or a family member that you'd only written letters with and never gotten to meet in person. It was because I've also spent time studying botany, and so to get to see the plants in their natural environment. It wasn't harvest time; they were all still green on the plants, but it was really special.
Oh yeah, I think for somebody like yourself in the industry, it just gives a much deeper appreciation, seeing everything from the farm to the cup. And actually, in my blog and my podcast, what I'm trying to do is give people, through people like you and your experiences, as much experience of that as possible. That coffee is
Hmm.
all encompassing from its beginning to its end. One other thing
Yeah.
I wanted to ask about, and I mentioned earlier that Denver, you are Denver's only 100% female-owned coffee roaster. What's the industry like for women? I've had other shows on where I've had people like Elle Jensen and Michaela
Hmm.
Gervard from Copenhagen and Erica Vani from New York speak on this issue, and actually some of them have run conferences or participated in conferences on this. What's your
Yeah.
perspective on it, and what is it like? What is it like when you got in originally, and is it evolving? Yeah.
It's definitely evolving. There's still a lot of gender divide on the back end of things, I would say. So
Hmm.
um, there's a young woman, Kat, who roasts for Logan House here in Denver, who's put together a great zine, the Coffee People zine. And she released some information recently about how, unscientific, just kind of starting to explore this topic, that the gender divide for baristas is pretty even. It's about 50-50. At this point, she also hadn't dug into gender binary, gender nonconforming folks,
Hmm.
but so it was pretty much just a divide between male and female. But it's pretty 50-50 for baristas. But once you step outside of that, for instance, in competition, it's primarily men,
Hmm.
and we see this also for roasters, production. You see it a lot on the farms too. So our Copper Doors owner, Hannah, tries to buy female produced coffees whenever she can. If it's subpar, she's not going to buy it. But if she's got a choice, two coffees are equal and she's got a choice, she'll try to support the woman because they're
Hmm.
underrepresented from the farm onward.
Right.
So
Yeah.
yes, it's getting better, but it's definitely, there's still work to be done. And there are other female roasters like Kat that I mentioned.
Right.
There's lots of female-owned cafes. There's woman roasters, but Copper Door at this point is pretty unique because we are female-owned, roasted, and
Right.
managed right
Right.
now.
Right.
But hopefully that'll
Yeah.
change.
I had a great interview recently with Joanna Alm from Drop Coffee in
Hmm.
Stockholm, and she's finished like third, fourth, and second in the World Roasting Competition the last few years, and she owns Drop Coffee, and but like you say, it's more the exception than the rule, and it's also interesting what you just said about how on the front end, it's baristas, it's about split men
Yeah,
and women, but on the back end is where the discrepancy is. It's not unlike other industries, like the film industry. You have an equal number
it's true.
of male and female actors, but in terms of directors and producers, that's where it's been much more difficult to get gender equality, and so I think and being the only 100% female-owned coffee roaster, what does your company, what does Door Coffee Roasters, Copper Door Coffee Roasters do to promote, if anything, to outside of your own company to promote gender equality and more inclusiveness in the industry?
I think she's really open to empowering individuals and education. So her background is teaching, and she's one of only 3 head judges for roasting competitions. She's part of the Roasters Guild. She's on the board of the Rocky Mountain Craft Coffee Alliance, as am I. She's involved in the community a lot, and I really think it's just about providing, not just providing opportunities, but empowering individuals in the community and providing education and talking about this more.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we're gonna hire who we need to hire that's qualified, that comes in the door, but she's really involved in the community in a way that I think is inspiring for a lot of young women and potential business owners. There's something interesting that I learned, that both a man and a woman can feel, can want to apply for the same job, but there's an inherent confidence, I think, that a lot of men have, that they'll look at a job description and say, okay, I've got half of the qualifications, I'll apply for it. Women often tend to be harder on themselves. They'll look at a list of 10 things that a job posting asks for and say, oh, I don't have that one quality. I can't do that one thing or those two things. I better wait. I better not apply.
Mm-hmm.
And I've definitely done that. And so I think it's important to be aware of that, and just to get more women involved in competition and in events and talking to each other, so that they are empowered to reach out and apply for things. And yeah. So, we try to host events. Also, Coffee Fest is coming to Denver in June, and we're going to put on some events. For instance, there's a hashtag movement called She's the Roaster, which is all about getting female roasters together to talk to each other about what they do and what their life is like. And because a lot of times, I met a woman in Seattle from Canada, and she doesn't know any other female roasters. So she came to a She's the Roaster event in Seattle and got to meet other women in the industry.
That's great. And if my show obviously is trying to shed light on this subject matter, and also in regard to people of color and transgender people of all sorts, because it's a great industry, coffee, and it should be all inclusive. And I think that there are so many people, especially when I was out at the Seattle at the Coffee Expo recently, that I know that have this on their mind and want to move in that direction. So for those listening, any suggestions for guests, I'll always just send it to me, especially on this subject matter, and we'll follow up on it. The last thing I guess I wanted to ask you, well, two things, Penny. One is, what's the coffee culture like in Denver? And I'm fascinated because I come in through Denver often, and a few years ago there was not much in the way of specialty coffee in the Denver area. Now it's really booming in regard to specialty coffee. What's the culture like? Are the cafes, are the roasters, is there a lot of interaction? Is it a supportive community? Is it a competitive community? What would you say about that?
It's both.
Yeah.
It's definitely exploded here. There's a lot going on. It's a great place to learn and to taste a lot of really great coffee. And it's definitely competitive. It's more competitive than a lot of other industries. I was talking to somebody that works at a brewery, and brewers, for instance, often will share recipes, because even if we use the same recipe, my beer is going to be different than your beer. Coffee is not like that, and part of the reason is because let's think about a restaurant. They can have 20 different kinds of beer on tap, but they're going to have one coffee. So it's pretty cutthroat in Denver, especially for those that wholesale, trying to win new accounts and keep them. But there is also a really great community of, people know each other, and we do a lot of events together, cuppings and happy hours, and we share information as far as classes, and it's really lovely. And there's a lot of really good people that you can go and talk to and learn from. It's really thriving here. It's a nice place to be for specialty coffee now. And I've lived in Denver a long time. As you said, it wasn't always like that.
Right. The final question, and that is, I always want to get this in when whoever I'm interviewing, and that is, what are your coffee consumption habits like? What and when do you drink? How often? Yeah.
I guess maybe not as much as some people would think. I always have like 12 to 14 ounces in the morning. Usually I'll pour over. Sometimes I often drink a French press, which is kind of looked down upon in the specialty coffee industry. And then really after the morning, just little bits throughout the day. Sometimes I'll have an espresso drink here and there. Often I'm cupping with people throughout the day, so just little bits through the late morning and early afternoon.
Right. Hey, but by the way,
Yeah.
in defense of French press, I just read a great piece from Tim Windebo from Tim Windebo Coffee in Oslo. He's a former world barista champ, and he owns three armed farms in Colombia. It's very highly regarded, and he had a nice little segment on how to make great coffee with French press. So, if
Nice.
you enjoy French press, keep doing it. Anyway, Penny, thank you so very much for your time, and uh,
Absolutely.
continued great success out there, and keep us posted, and come back on the show sometime.
I would love that. Yeah, thank you so much.
All right. All the best. Take care.